Good evening. In this broadcast, the information program Time. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, issued a statement today in which he announced that the military phase of the reinstating of the application of the Constitution of Russia in the Chechen Republic in practice has been completed. As is noted in the text of the document delivered by the press service of the head of state, the shift to the phase of civil construction is beginning and the restoration of constitutional forms of rule. Priority aims to be resolved in this phase are restoring the infrastructure, the life services for the population, and defense of human rights in full scale. On this day, which gives us hope for the restoration of peace, let us bow our heads in memory of the soldiers who died in that conflict in front of those losses sustained by the peaceful population. Let the tragedy endured by Russians and the Chechen people will serve as a lesson for the nations and politicians. With these words, the President ended his address today. Today it became known that over the presidential palace in Grozny, which was overtaken, the Ural troops have raised the flag of the Russian Federation. But according to Interfax's information, Dudaev supporters assert that the taking of the presidential palace does not yet mean a final end of war. The staff of the armed forces was redislocated to the other bank of the river Sunja, a few kilometers from the presidential palace. As we've already reported, the first exchange of prisoners of war in Chechnya was held in the suburbs of the village Asinovskaya. Today we received video clips where the prisoner of war of the federal forces, the 19-year-old native of the Kemerovo district, Sergei Kuznetsov, is exchanged for the resident of Ochkoy Martan, Musu Beliskayev. The representative of the command of the federal forces, Lieutenant Colonel Sibirtsev, announced readiness to continue similar acts. We're prepared not just for an exchange, but are prepared to buy back our prisoners, he said. According to Sibirtsev, today near Asinovskaya, another exchange of prisoners should occur. In Ingushetia, the mothers of the Russian soldiers fighting in Chechnya demanded immediate cessation of bombings of Grozny, the removal of forces, and the main thing, to publish lists of casualties. They sent their appeal to the federal authorities. The control over distribution of humanitarian aid, the authors of that appeal request to be transferred to the Coordinating Council of Soldiers' Mothers of Russia, which temporarily is in Nazran. But the Ministry of Emergency Situations of Russia, Sergei Shoigu, called the statement of several sources of mass media an absolute fabrication, that ostensibly humanitarian cargoes being sent to Grozny are ending up in the hands of Dudaev military gangs. According to the minister, the cargoes are headed for those populated points where there are representatives from the Ministry of Emergency Situations. However, Sergei Shoigu specified that for the future fate of cargoes, especially in the territory of Ingushetia, his department cannot assume responsibility. Military specialists feel that even after the end of combat activities in Chechnya, the deaths of people is not excluded because Dudaev gunmen have stuffed the Chechen land with mines. To disarm them, prevent the death of peaceful citizens and troops is the main objective of the field engineers since the beginning of war. Therefore, their battle for the lives of people knows no rest, and the sense of risk is always intensified to the utmost. Each day, intelligence, reconnaissance services brings us information, and groups of field engineers are dispatched to unearth mines. We recently defused an entire anti-tank minefield, but before that, a tank did blow up. Basically, we worked with K9 units. Just before Grozny, also a combat transport vehicle was blown up. Our group went there and defused a minefield which consisted of anti-tank and partly anti-infantry mines. Many officers from the Ministry of Defense who are being sent to Chechnya with the newly formed divisions absolutely refused to embark on that mission, explaining the refusal for family and other reasons. Since in the motor artillery brigades being prepared for deployment, a regiment of combat danger is announced, the officers refusing to go according to the bylaws can be court-martialed. This was a comment made to the Russian Information Agency by a representative from the Ministry of Defense. But concrete measures against those who are refusing to go to Chechnya Chechnya are being applied. Evidence of this is a report from Itatas. Disarmed and disbanded was the OMON Special Designation Squad in the city Bratsky, Irkutsk district, because of its refusal to go to Chechnya. According to the head of the City Department of the Internal Affairs, those refusing will be discharged from service. In Chechnya, the rotating replacement of internal affairs of the Ministry of Affairs of Russia, OMON and Special Quick Response Squads, is coming to an end. Some of them, having undergone brief training preparation in Rostov and Mozdok, were forced immediately to enter combat. The attack of the Dudayev forces on the outskirts of Grozny and in the city to regain lost positions didn't end in success. Continuing, together with the army forces, to engage in battle for the city, the internal forces and militia have already begun to work on tasks in post-combat period in Chechnya, confiscating weapons from the population who abstained from combat, restoring local organs of internal affairs. And so, in the Naterich region, the Znamensky Ministry of Internal Affairs Department was restored, employing 65 people. The attestation of local militia is being conducted in the Naursk and Shaikovsky regions. Representatives of the Ministry of Internal Affairs met with former employees of organs of internal affairs from the Shalinsk and Grozny areas. Increasing warmth and support are felt by officers and soldiers from the most varied social organization and simply from families of compatriots. While some, for the 100,000th time, are slandering the soldiers or crying crocodile tears over them, others help with bread and maternal smiles. And now a report about how events in Grozny were developing today. Above the overtaken presidential palace in Grozny, today the troops from the Ural district raised the flag of the Russian Federation. But the triumph of the victory over the rebels has a bitter taste after all. Was it worth it to train gunmen for so long so that later young lives would pay their price? The Dudayev supporters abandoned the palace. The building is under the control of Russian forces. About the fate of prisoners within the palace, nothing is yet known. The building is being cleared of mines. The press service of the government of Russia today announced that units and subdivisions of the federal forces conducted combat in the center of Grozny and were clearing individual parts of the city. The northerly and western groups of forces reunited on Victory Prospect. Internal affairs forces are closing off basic directions of movement of gunmen, blockading strongholds of the militarized gangs, and sealing off the borders of the Chechen Republic. The opposition forces are in their previous regions and are not participating in combat. The groups of the Ministry of Emergency Situations have removed 170 refugees from the capital of Chechnya. To Tolstoy Yurt, a subdivision was dispatched to conduct restorational work. In Mozdok, an airplane has arrived with medical cargo. Refugees from Chechnya are being aided by the residents of neighboring Ingushetia. There is information that Dudayev and his bodyguard contingent of 200 are located in a bomb shelter in one of the hospitals of the city. According to radio interception, in mountainous areas of Chechnya, bases of unlawful military gangs are being formed. Contracts are being made with people who intend to continue combat operations. To dispatch soldiers from the initial period of services up to 6 months to participate in the combat in Chechnya is categorically forbidden. This was the response of the Russian head of the General Staff, Mikhail Kolesnikov, to the inquiry of Vladimir Shumeyka regarding the deployment in Chechnya of untrained soldiers. Having read this response today at the meeting of the Federative Council, Vladimir Shumeyka expressed the opinion that it's necessary to immediately hold an investigation into each case of the deployment of inexperienced soldiers and punish the guilty. For the third day, the current session of the Federative Council, the Chechen operation disturbs the minds and hearts of deputies. The draft resolution proposed by parliamentarians, unlike the preceding ones, suggested quite radical measures. But not having embarked into full discussion of the document, the deputies were subjected to psychological attack from the force ministries. The representatives showed and commented on a film of the atrocities committed by Afghan Mujaheds and on the Tajik-Afghan border. However, this device didn't influence the course of discussions. Parliamentarians were resolute. Individually, the President of the Russian Federation, the Security Council, with the participation naturally of members of government, has resolved the question of the deployment of armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of the subject of a Russian Federation, the Chechen Republic. The President of the Russian Federation may be held responsible pursuant to the criminal legislation in effect and in accordance with the Constitution. The deputies wanted to recommend that the Duma express non-confidence in the government and impeach the President. president, and also forbid the chairman of the Federative Council to participate in the Security Council, suspend the involvement of the higher chamber of parliament in the agreement on social accord, and recognize as illegal the use of armed forces in Chechnya without declaring a state of war or emergency. The majority of deputies, however, didn't support all these proposals. The actions of the president comply with the constitution according to which the Federative Council was elected. The Federative Council should most of all respect that constitution, not in any case to resort to any congresses of national deputies or a non-confidence vote toward government or the procedure of impeaching the president. This simply can't be. As a result, the Federative Council, jointly with the Duma, decided to establish a commission to investigate Chechen events back from 1991 and to suggest that the Prosecutor General open criminal case regarding the matter of transferring weapons to Chechen authorities. Also, deputies of the Federal Council, as the Duma, are dissatisfied with the current division of powers and intend to form yet another commission to make amendments to the Constitution. This same problem forced the parliamentarians today to adopt a statement in which the negligent attitude of the President and the government to the legislative rule is expressed. Because the decision to launch combat in Chechnya was made in circumvention of the deputies' opinions and without their involvement. Today, arriving in Moscow from Nazran is the famous human rights defender, the Deputy of the State Duma, Sergei Kovalyov. The basic topic of the press conference, which was given by Sergei Kovalyov, was the collapse of dialogues, which, in his opinion, were scheduled to be held in Nazran. I'll remind you that, according to the official announcement of the press service of the government of Russia, during the conversation in Moscow between the Premier, Chernomyrdin, and Dudayev representatives on the instructions of the chairman of the government for contacts with the aim of ceasefire, military command was assigned to the generals Rokhly and Babichev, with whom the field commanders were to make direct contact in Grozny. The suggested meeting in Nazran, according to the government's press service, was never discussed. At the press conference in Vnukovo airport, Sergei Kovalyov told the press that he arrived in Moscow for only 3 days to clarify reasons for the collapse of the ceasefire, about which the Prime Minister of Russia agreed on recently with representatives of Chechnya. Kovalyov noted that the Russian generals used all their skill in order to avoid talks on the technical side of ceasefire. Moreover, according to him, the Minister of Defense, Karachev, interpreted the matter in such a way that the ostensibly not a ceasefire but the unconditional capitulation of the Chechen armed forces was to be discussed. In Kovalyov's opinion, truce in Chechnya is indispensable, first of all, to stop bloodshed and to resume the dialogue process, without which the armed conflict can spread far beyond Grozny and become the beginning of a lengthy partisan war. Sergei Adamovich, the energies of the Russian armed forces are concentrated on Grozny, but in your opinion, will it end by taking it all? No. It's surmisable it won't end. This is already clear now, even for the military. And I think that this is the prime explanation for the expanding of the operation in mountain areas or at access points to mountain areas of Chechnya. More villages are being bombed. There are more casualties among the rural population. During the last 24 hours, the immigration services of territories adjacent to Chechnya have been approached by 3,500 more people. During 2 months, 118,000 residents have fled from the Republic. In the Federal Immigration Services of Russia, from the 23rd of January, a contact telephone will be operating for information on displaced persons from Chechnya, but only about those who have been registered in the territorial Federal Immigration Services. The telephone 095, that is Moscow's code, 207-3940, will be operating from the hours 10 to 1600 starting the 23rd of January. Our province, as always, has turned out to be amazingly compassionate, and forgetting all their problems, people simply flocked to the garrison hospital and hotel for refugees. They're bringing candy, fruit, greens, honey, toiletries, books, newspapers for some, and for some, clothing. During the course of 24 hours in the garrison hospital, an additional 3 city and intercity telephone lines were set up. The boys were able to call home. By instructions of the district administration, the telephone telephone here operates free of charge for them. For the needs of the injured, 150 million rubles was allotted. Relatives from other cities can stay here at free of charge hotels and they will receive help in transportation. The Ministry of Health of Russia is providing constant aid not only to the injured military federal forces but to the population of Chechnya. In the next few days, 2 more specialized brigades will be sent to Mozdok from the Institute of Surgery and Preventative Medicine. The volunteer medics will travel to Chechnya for the work in the period of restoring the healthcare system of the period of the Republic, and their first task will be to vaccinate the population. Specialists and immunologists fear that on the territory of Chechnya, a natural source of the plague could break out. Ministry of Healthcare and Medical Provision intends to prevent attacks of less dangerous but no less pleasant infections to the Northern Caucasus. On an emergency basis, agents against ticks and fleas are being sent. At today's press conference, the head of the delegation of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Thierry Mera, successfully avoided all questions with political subtexts, and they were in the majority. I quote, "Our aid is impartial. We want that it should reach each and all." The Red Cross sees as its aim, first of all, to help the peaceful population. Since the beginning of the combat, 31 tons of medications were delivered to the region. They are conveyed to 10 hospitals in Chechnya, 5 hospitals in Dagestan, and 2 in Ingushetia. They are bandages and stitching materials, antibiotics, and painkillers. Already today, thousands of people, so-called displaced persons, have received food and clothing. Such aid will be provided for 400,000 people who suffered as a result of combat. The International Committee of the Red Cross is undertaking all possible measures to receive access to the prisoners of war on both sides. It calls on authorities of the Russian Federation and Chechnya to observe norms of humanitarian law. The International Committee of the Red Cross today appealed to donor countries with a request for 55 million Swiss francs in order to conduct humanitarian operations in Chechnya. These funds will be applied to provide immediate aid, first of all, to the civilian population of the Republic. According to the last reports, the number of people who died in the earthquake in the Japanese municipalities of Kobe and Osaka are 3,684. 652 remain missing, 21,631 remain injured. Just as if after a blitzkrieg, this is the appearance of the suburb of the Japanese city Kobe, which suffered the most from the earthquake. Entire blocks have burned down or disappeared from the face of the earth. Yesterday, the fire was extinguished in most parts, but this morning a new outburst occurred and 13 more homes burned. The fire workers' task is complicated further by the fact that, in essence, the water pipe system has been demolished. Water for extinguishing, where possible, is taken directly from the sea. A shortage of drinking water affects people greatly without a roof, or even those who have abandoned homes which have not yet collapsed but are in terrible disrepair. Underground jolts continue constantly. Some of them are strongly felt, and experts fear a repeat of the catastrophe. Yesterday, 187,000 people have been evacuated. This is how one of the most marvelous corners of Kobe looked, an artificial island with an exemplary city, although it did survive because here all of the construction is new. But yesterday, all day on television, the population was instructed on evacuation routes and was advised to leave their homes. What can one say about areas of the city where old buildings were built without regard for the seismic activity in the zone? Currently, the press and certain politicians criticize the organization of rescue work and accuse authorities of tardiness. And in truth, the disaster hit where it was not expected. There were almost no predictions for earthquake in that region. The city Kobe, squeezed in a long strip between the mountain ridge and the sea, in hours almost lost all access by railways and roads. Now, lineups are forming for vital foods. People complain about crowded conditions, the absence of blankets, and, most importantly, bathroom facilities. Gradually, however, supplies are increasing. Today in the disaster area, 22,000 rescuers were already at work. A group of specialists from Switzerland arrived with dog teams to find people buried in the rubble. But the majority of countries which offered aid, including Russia, the Japanese responded with gratitude and a polite refusal. Today, to the earthquake zone, the Prime Minister Tomichi Murayama flew out. The government has already allotted $1 billion for restorational work from the reserve fund, but this is a drop in the ocean. As much help as possible is being provided by all of Japan. Even organized crime is involved. The mafia from Japan's largest gangster organization, whose headquarters was in Kobe and, in essence, was destroyed by the earthquake, has organized free distribution of bread and milk and water for the population. The Free Economic Zone Nahotka decided to aid the Japanese zone affected by earthquake. To the neighboring country, construction materials will be sent free of charge. Apart from that, the 4 ports of Nahotka are prepared to begin immediate delivery of cargo to Japan to abolish the repercussions of the earthquake as soon as possible. On this day, 50 years ago, our forces stepped onto the territory of Germany. Even during the most terrifying and hopeless first months of war, we knew that such a day would surely come, and it did. From the walls of Moscow and Stalingrad in January of 1945, the war returned from whence it came to our land. The population, which had hid in the basements with fear, listened to the thundering of Russian cannons. The Germans never imagined the future of their country to be anything like this. Hitler promised them world supremacy and a 1,000-year Reich. He promised to turn other nations into the slaves of the great Germany, and managed to incite in the hearts of millions of decent citizens the abhorrent instincts of ethnic exclusiveness and racial superiority. In just years, a country of great musicians, poets, and philosophers turned into an enormous barracks. It seemed that no one or nothing in the world would be able to stop this grand and terrible war machine. Europe turned out to be impotent in the face of its powerful squeeze, and only our soldier was capable of interrupting its victorious, bloody gait. But at what price? And now the time of reckoning has come for all that suffering which the Hitler regime brought to other nations. For the Germans themselves, its fire has turned into a true nightmare. By Hitler's order, battalions of the National Home Guard, the Volkssturm, absorbed the remaining male population from the ages of 16 to 60. And when our forces stepped onto the territory of Germany, the Volkssturm began to recruit women. Because of their insane ideas, the Nazis were prepared to sacrifice even the future of their own country. For us and for the Germans, this war was the most terrible national tragedy in the entire history. Maybe that is why Germany today is one of the few countries in Europe where the tombs of our soldiers are in exemplary condition. Unlike others, here they remember all too well what the price to the population may be for their convictions of national exclusiveness and racial superiority. The Russian-Finnish dialogue continued in Moscow today by the prime ministers of the two countries confirmed that Moscow and Helsinki intend to more actively use the rich potential of the two-sided relations. And judging from results of the talks of Viktor Chernomyrdin with Sesko Aho in the Russian-Finnish trade economic cooperation, of priority will be issues concerning investments and the implementation of major projects. After the signing of an agreement on immediate notification in the event of nuclear disaster and exchange of information on nuclear installations and protocols on cooperation in the area of the timber trade, Viktor Chernomyrdin and Sesko Aho optimistically assess the prospects of their mutual ties. Our trade turnover has increased by 40%, and therefore it's important for us not just to preserve, but to continue to increase further. I feel, considering the opinion of my government and my colleague as well, that we will use this potential better in our relations. Today, the Prime Minister of Finland, Sesko Aho, discussed with the Chairman of the State Duma, Ivan Rybkin, various aspects of the Russian-Finnish relations. The Russian President Boris Yeltsin today hosted the Director of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the Director of the World Trade Organization, Peter Sutherland. They discussed matters concerning Russia joining that organization. Peter Sutherland emphasized that Russia must be part of the world economic system, and therefore the facilitation of its entry into these organizations is a priority objective for them. The President of Russia today signed a decree on personnel appointments to the posts of Deputy Ministers of Defense. Defense. According to Interfax's information, in the new staff structure of the leadership of the Ministry of Defense, the former deputies of the head of the military department are absent. The Colonel Generals Boris Gromov, Georgy Kondratyev, and Valery Mironov. Currently, they are on vacation, and it's expected in the next few days. In respect to these generals, the President will sign a decree on their future fate. Among the new appointments, also not listed, is the former Deputy Minister, the Colonel General Matvey Vorlakov. In connection with the accusations made against the Moscow attorney Dmitry Kubovsky for his involvement in the theft of the priceless manuscripts from the Russian National Library, the means of stopping him was decided upon, that is, detaining him under guard. Soon General Dima will be transferred from the investigative isolation unit on Lysyenny Prospect to the sadly renowned prison called the Crosses. His procedural status has changed. He was detained, considered to be a suspect. Now he has been accused. We have filed charges and chosen to detain him. Can you say that Yakubovsky signed and acknowledged this accusation? We agreed not to respond to this topic. According to unofficial sources, Dmitry Yakubovsky did not admit his guilt. According to one of the versions expressed by the journalists today, the case of the Kremlin lawyer is of a political nature. Citing the famous attorney Henrik Padova, St. Petersburg agencies reported that the investigation is attempting to extract compromising material from Yakubovsky against prominent state figures. I simply have no time to read the press and follow what the attorney Padova says and what papers write, but the fact is that we are dealing in pure crime, that is the theft of manuscripts from a library. That is all in which we are involved. I'm not interested in the rest at all. There is no political undertone here. I, with full authority, can assure you of that. The war in Chechnya evidently will not reflect on the Russian-Kuwaiti cooperation. This became clear after today's meeting between Andrei Kozyrov with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kuwait, the Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Asabah. Russia feels that cooperation with the Emirate is of a strategic nature, since Kuwait is one of the more influential countries of the Persian Gulf. And we are expecting currently a flow of investments from Kuwait into the Russian economy. In a confidential conversation, Andrei Kozyrov and Sabah Ahmed Asabah discussed the situation in the Persian Gulf and overall in the Middle East. The Kuwaiti guest highly assessed the diplomatic efforts of Moscow in the issue of Iraq recognizing Kuwait's borders and expressed hope for fruitful development of cooperation pursuant to the agreement which was signed by Viktor Chernomyrdin during a recent visit to Kuwait. Croatia has rejected the appeal of the UN Security Council to re-examine its decision to stop the UN peacekeeping operation on Croatian territory after the 31st of March. The refusal to continue the operation in support of peace is described in a letter from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, Mat Granic, to the Chairman of the Security Council, and is viewed in the UN as the official Zagreb response. Such a response was expected, but many are bewildered by it. Which presence of peacekeepers in Croatia is being discussed? If this is the presence of the UN headquarters in Zagreb, this is one thing. If it is the location of the peacekeeping units, including the Russian battalion on the territory of the Serb Krajina, this is something else completely. In this case, the issue is precisely the Serb Krajina, and this is more or less 1/4 of the territory of a once whole Croatian republic. The Krajina Serbs, who comprise a compact ethnic minority, took it in war more than 2 years ago, and in all resolutions of the Security Council, these lands are called territories, although they are self-proclaimed, but the republic, the Serb Krajina, and therefore the demarche of Zagreb, as I see it, is simply out of place. The territory of the Serb Krajina is under the defense of the Blue Helmets, and their withdrawal from there could lead to a new outburst of armed conflict between the Croats and the Krajina Serbs. Indirectly, this was hinted at by the Croatian president, Franjo Tudjman, who called the Serb Krajina the occupied portion of Croatia and announced Zagreb's intention to forcefully reintegrate it. By its decision, the leadership of Croatia again has confirmed the fact that the problem of the forced collapse of Yugoslavia, as previously, remains unresolved and as never before intense and complex. Information from our sports commentator will complete our broadcast. I wish you all the best. Good evening. The Australian Open tennis tournament continues. Another game day brought no surprises except for the defeat of Wayne Ferrer from the South African Republic and Richard Krajcik from Holland. Successful in the second round was our Yevgeny Kafelnikov. His rival was the Kenneth Carlsen from Holland. Losing the first match, Kafelnikov subsequently won the next three and entered the 1/16 of the finals, where he'll meet with the victor of the pair, Guy Forget France and Jones Björk from Sweden. Also in the next level is our Yelena Markarova, who beat the Czech Radka Zurbakova in 2 sets. Better late than never. Our congratulations to the student team of Russian handball, the trainers Vladimir Maximov and Leonid Krashevich. They won at the championship in Turkey in the beginning of January. They won 5 matches, including the finale over the Turkish team, 28-23. You see fragments of that match. Our handball players won the first gold medals of Russian athletes at the world competitions this year. We're happy that the majority of the players on the team are candidates for the national team of Russia, which in 4 months will have to defend its championship title at the World Championships in Iceland. From the matches of the International Hockey League played today, in the center of attention was the meeting of the Moscow teams Army and Spartak. The Spartaks, conducting a desperate battle for the playoffs, worsened their tournament situation, losing to the Army team 2-6. The advantage of the Army team was felt throughout the entire game. 2 goals for the Army team was scored by Denis Vinokurov. Good evening. In the north of the European part of Russia, winter seems to have overcome thaw and suddenly changed to cold. The period of snows and blizzards has ended. The extreme change in the weather is connected with the growth of atmospheric pressure and the forming of a broad anticyclone over the upper Volga. Therefore, in the Arkhangelsk area, the Nenetsk Autonomous District, and the Republic of Komi, it will be less cloudy and snows will cease. Night cold will increase to -14 to 19. During the day hours, the temperatures will read -10 to 15. It's cloudy and a little bit warmer in Karelian and the northwestern area, with some isolated patches of light snows with day temperatures -7 to 12 degrees. Powerful Atlantic air masses are bringing unfavorable, windy but warm weather on the Kola Peninsula for this time of year. Temperatures here are around 0. In the central and Volgovatsk area, it's partly cloudy and cold in the morning, down to -23 during the day, -10 to 15. This is the influence of the previously mentioned anticyclone over the upper Volga. In the Baltic countries, partly cloudy skies during the day, -3 to 8 degrees. Same temperatures in Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. Here, it will continue to be variably cloudy, mostly without precipitation. In the central Chernozem area and over the central Volga, tomorrow will be sunny and quite cool, -7 to 12. In the Krasnodar Rim, Stavropolye Rim, and Ingushetia and Chechen republics, the influence of a northern anticyclone is felt more strongly. Therefore, precipitation is unlikely here. In the morning, there will be patches of fog. At night, -8 to 13. During the day, -3 to 8 degrees. Beyond the Caucasus, it's cloudy, +3 to 8. In Armenia, it's 2 to 3 degrees cooler. Residents of St. Petersburg can expect partly cloudy skies. At night, -11 to 13. During the day, -6 to 8 degrees. In Moscow, it will remain quite cold, with temperatures at night -16 to 18. Throughout the district, as low as -23. During the day, -9 to 11. And so, as we see, we did have an epiphany cold spell in Russia. That completes our broadcast. The prediction was compiled by the Oceanic Meteorological Center. Goodbye.